So I'm going to call the March 21st, 2024 South River Water and Sewer Authority Finance Committee meeting to order. And we will get it started. And when the chair gets here, she can take over and I will step back. Thank you so much for being here, the finance director, assistant finance director, executive director, and our PIO, who's always here. We have Jimmy Gooch, the chairman for the SGWASA board, and myself, Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Creedmoor, Georgiana. If the staff would like to introduce themselves, they can.
Thank you. I'm Scott Schroyer, Executive Director, South Granville Water and Sewer Authority. To my far right is Crystal Lee, PIO, Board Secretary. Ruben Carden, our Assistant Finance Director. Richard Ballmer, our Finance Director and Board Treasurer. So welcome. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you for your attendance today at our second Finance Committee meeting to review the proposed FY 24-25 budget. The first FY 24-25 proposed budget meeting was held on 2/28/24. During the meeting, the Finance Committee members provided staff with questions, comments, and direction on the proposed budget. Today's meeting will focus on addressing the changes requested in this latest version here. So our first item to discuss this afternoon is item 3 in your meeting agenda. Item 3 in your meeting agenda will cover the budget message and budget ordinance for FY 24-25. Follow-up items from the previous meeting, and then a rate review and bill comparison chart. So I'll just pause for a moment. Welcome, Mayor Jordan.
Thank you.
Finance Committee meeting. Good to see you this afternoon. Is there anything that you would like to add before I get started on item 3A?
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. So looking at item 3A, the FY 24-25 budget message and budget ordinance that you have on your screen, page 4 of 30 in our agenda. This message or this budget message should look very familiar from the previous meeting that we had. I would like to point out a couple of changes that have occurred since that meeting. So there are no changes in the first 3 paragraphs. So looking at the 4th paragraph, which starts off with respect to staffing, the proposed budget includes a request for 2 new entry-level utility operators positions. At our previous meeting, I requested 3 total positions. I've reduced that by 1 because of funding of a utility engineer, which we'll talk about in just a moment. No changes to paragraph 5. Looking at the top of page 5 of 30, in terms of our key revenue elements in the proposed budget, I'd just like to walk through those items. Looking at our first budget bullet, the rate increase projects water revenue to increase by $550,000 compared to FY 23 and 24. Now, there's been no change in that value since the previous meeting. Moving to the next bulleted item, the rate increase projects sewer revenues to increase by $500,000 compared to FY 23 and 24. That value has increased by $100,000 since the previous meeting. Bullet number 3, the proposed rate increase projects capital revenue of $2.4 million to fund infrastructure asset depreciation at 90%. And we'll have further discussion on that this afternoon as far as some rate projections based on greater depreciation rates. The near-term goal, 5 years, is to increase this value to 100%. Nothing has changed presently in that item. That's the same as the previous budget message. The last bullet, fee categories included in FY 24-25 rate fees and charges schedules were reviewed and expanded and updated as necessary to reflect the actual cost of service. This item is part of our agenda this afternoon, and we'll take a look at that further as well. Any questions or comments at this point from the Finance Committee members?
None for me. None for me.
Anything that you'd like to add before we move on? No. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next subsection, key payroll and benefits expense elements in the proposed budget. One of the changes to our first bullet here, as I mentioned previously, is we had a request to add 3 new positions, and this has been reduced to 2 new positions. One is for the water treatment plant operator, and one is for the wastewater treatment plant operator. Previously, we had requested one utility maintenance mechanic. That position has been dropped in this request. The next item is to modify one existing position, engineering director to assistant executive director. Before I move off of that item, let me just go back to that first bullet item and talk about the request for the one utility maintenance mechanic that we dropped out of this. The finance committee members remember from a previous meeting, we had a utility engineer's position that had been funded previously and was currently funded, but we were proposing in the future budget not to fund that position, yet to hold that position as we move forward through the fiscal year until we had an engineering director on board. It was decided recently with discussion with the full board that we would actually fund the utility engineer and also change the position of the engineering director to an assistant director within the organization. Because of that move and funding the utility engineer with that expense, instead of asking for 3 positions and to fund that position, we pulled off the 1 position, if you will, just to keep a balance or cap on our request for positions and also the expense related to that. Moving on in those items, the third bullet, the 3% wage schedule adjustment, no changes. 4% maximum performance merit increase for employees, no changes. In fact, there are no changes for any of those bullet items remaining in the key payroll and benefits expense elements in the proposed budget. So before we move on to the next section, I'll ask the committee if they have any questions or comments for us.
So not for eliminating that 1 position, it doesn't jeopardize the operation at all. Is that right?
Well, it doesn't jeopardize the operations at all. That is true. We're looking to expand some of our programs within that operation, and it just limits us from doing that further.
At this time?
Yes, at this time. That is correct.
So the one water treatment plant operator and the wastewater treatment plant operator, those are going to be on 3rd shift?
We have some flexibility. We presented that last time as focusing on 2nd shift. So they will be 2nd shift, 1st shift, 3rd shift, where we need those employees, basically shifts. But yes, and that's very instrumental for those plant operators or those operations at those facilities.
You know how important they are. Just are the shifts 12 hours?
We
Do 8-hour
we
shifts.
run 8-hour shifts, and we do run all weekend as well.
Okay. All right. But I would like to see 24, to make sure that the people who are on the midnight shift are not alone eventually.
Correct. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, key expenses and capital outlay in the proposed budget. There were no changes basically to the sizable increases that we talked about previously in terms of supply costs, electricity costs, or professional services for general legal or engineering services. The next item, a projected 12% increase in property and liability insurance premiums, has stayed the same since the previous meeting. We do have a change here in the next item, replacing or purchasing operating equipment totaling $202,397. That previous value was $199,897. So I think you can appreciate that was a little bit of a tweak there, but not much of a change from our previous meeting. Again, the previous value was $199,897. And the last bullet on that page that discusses including $2.4 million for depreciation expense funded at 90% has not changed. Any questions from the committee on what we just covered? Richard, again, anything that you would like to comment on at this point before we move on? This time, okay.
I just had a note. So it's the 2.4 million for depreciation expenses. It's going to stay at 90%.
Yes, we have not proposed a change. We have a discussion item coming up at this meeting to talk about those additional percentages, and we will be presenting that soon. So that could be a recommended change by the finance committee. At this point, we've just left it static.
Okay, so no,
That discussion.
last time we talked about, I just had a note, we were talking about moving it to 95% depreciation. So I didn't know.
And we do have that information
Okay.
for you today to take a look at that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. The next item, key programs in the proposed budget, page 6. The only change to that document is really in terms of the first bullet item. And one thing I would like to point out, and this is with relationship to our PFAS removal program. I had a note in there previously that we we're hoping to receive notification from NCDEQ about a potential grant, and we basically have been awarded a $500,000 grant for that program. So I thought that was important to include in this budget message as we move forward. Other than that, everything remains the same on that page in terms of what we're focused on. And I have just added a message at the bottom of the document as well, just thanking all the team members within the organization for their assistance in putting this budget together, which is very important.
So it says this work will start June of 2024, which was what we had previously planned, correct?
That is correct.
So this puts $500,000 back into our budget that we were going to have to use for this.
That is correct.
Touch it.
In fact, the board had approved on a recommendation last July in the 10-year CIP, that same expense for us to take on that bench testing for the PFAS. So yes, now that money can be used other places within the CIP to help us move forward. So, and I will be bringing a contract to the board probably at the May board meeting for CDM Smith, who will be actually managing this work for us. So it'll be an engineering agreement require a board approval. All right, very good. So I'd like to move on to page 7, which is the FY 24-25 proposed budget ordinance. So in front of you is the proposed budget ordinance. I'd like to just walk through the same for you from the top down in terms of what's changed from the previous version. I'm going to check my numbers here. So in section 1, we talk about estimated revenues for the fiscal year. In paragraph 2 of section 1, you will actually see some values in that paragraph. And let me just read that to you. In comparison to the approved FY 23-24 budget, the FY 24-25 water sales and sewer use charges were estimated using a revenue increase of $550,000 for water and revenue increase of $500,000 for sewer. Let me just pause there and just tell you that in the previous version that we provided to you, as far as the budget ordinance, the revenue increase of $550,000 for water has remained the same. And the revenue increase of $500,000 has been increased by $100,000. Previously, it was $400,000 for sewer. So there's your change there. Just wanted to point that out. Now, this kind of cascades as we move on to the next section in revenues. So as we look at our revenue table on that page, the first item, water revenues, $6,250,000 has stayed the same since the previous meeting. The next item, wastewater revenues, previously was $9,200,000. Yeah, this version is $9,300,000. So there's the difference in your $100,000 difference right there. The non-billing revenue has remained the same at $397,800. The interest income has remained the same. No, excuse me. The interest income dropped from $572,714 to $569,535. And then other financing sources has remained the same. So our total revenues and other financing sources is now $16,517,335. That's a difference over the previous version by $96,821. So I will pause there, and I would like to ask Richard, would you like to add anything to that discussion or any clarification on those values?
The only thing I'll add to it is that, as you pointed out, the wastewater revenues increased by 100,000 over the last meeting, and that is due to those position changes. So basically, the total change in budget from the finance committee meeting 1 to this one is nearly 100,000, and that's due to those shifting of new positions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee members at this point? Okay, if nothing, can I move forward then with our expenditures?
Yes.
So based on some of the changes that we made above and to the budget, including the addition of the funding to the utility engineer's position and also the change in the engineering director to assistant director, we had some changes in our expenditures in our departments, administration, human resources, engineering, our top three departments. So we have some changes there. I can read those changes to you if you'd like to know the difference.
I just have one question.
Okay, sure.
I'm trying to understand why human resources is only $144,000. What does that encompass besides the director of human resources? And where is the rest of the payroll numbers for, are payroll numbers divided into departments? I guess that's the way to answer the question.
Yes, administration.
That's correct. So the payroll and the benefits that go with each of the departments is in that department. Human resources, what's in that department, the 144,000 you mentioned, that only includes as far as pay and benefits, the HR manager herself. And then the other expenses in that department include things, the administrative costs with benefits, drug testing programs, pre-employment screenings. All of those expenses are in HR as well.
So in administration, we have the executive director, the finance director, the assistant finance director, and the PIO.
The PIO and now the new assistant executive.
So it's in here already.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Very good. So are there any other questions regarding any of those expenditures on that page? None? Okay, very good. So looking at the top of page 8, which is the second page of the proposed budget ordinance, continued. Again, our total expenditures at $16,517,335 match our total revenues as we talked about on the previous page. And we talked about that having a net increase of $96,821. That's the previous version that we presented to the committee members. There are no other changes on the form. Further down the page, as far as the grading of funds, it matches what we just talked about. And section 3 has no edits. So we'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments from the committee members. Okay, if not at this time, I'd like to move on then to section 3B, which are all items from the 2/28/24 Finance Committee meeting, and Richard Ballmer will walk through that. Richard?
So as Scott mentioned earlier, the Finance Committee first met the first meeting on February 28th of 2024. And during that meeting, there were some things discussed and some things requested for the next meeting, this meeting. And so we thought it wise to capture what we understood those requests from the committee to be and bring them up front at this meeting so that the data that follows will kind of support those. First, the decisions that were made during the February 29th meeting, the committee did make decisions on merchant service fees. The projected costs are not included in the proposed budget 24-25 because the committee decided that they will continue to be passed through to customers. The committee is not supportive of technology fees that have been omitted from the rate schedule. It will be later in your package. Merchant services fees for in-person card present payments, which currently are being paid by SGWASA, will become pass-throughs as well, so that all customers paying with debit or credit cards will absorb that fee. Starting with the implementation of the new software system, technologies sometime in fiscal year 24-25, once that puzzle is in place. So that kind of summarizes what was decided at the prior meeting. Section 2 are changes that the board suggested or requested from the previous meeting. We, as Scott has already covered, we reclassified the engineering director's position to an assistant executive director position and moved it from the engineering department, as Ms. Kaczynski just noted, to the administration department. And that is budgeted at the maximum pay for that pay grade. We funded the utility engineer's position, which in the previous version of the budget brought to you in February was not really funded. Continuing on those changes, we removed the one position that Scott's already brought to your attention for the water line utility worker. So that's a difference in today's budget versus the one in February. And then section 3, additional information that first of all, were there any questions about section 1 or 2, or did we misunderstand anything from the prior committee meeting included in sections 1 or 2?
I think you're good.
Section 3 is the additional information that the committee requested for this meeting that is included in this package. One of the questions was what it would cost to increase 401k match by 1%. As you know, the current budget that we brought to you before and the current one before you today is still at 2% because we wanted to leave things static. The committee made a decision. So currently the budget is 2%, which you'll see in the budget mill rates is 2%. The cost to increase it from 2% to 3% as far as the math, if you base it on current employee participation, for the last 2 to 3 months, if you took those and calculated what 1 more percent would be for that participation, it would be roughly $12,000. Of course, that can change month to month if the person adds drops out, but that's a good estimate. If you assume that every employee participated at the maximum 3% rate, the maximum that could cost SGWASA would be $34,000. Of course, we know we'll never get. It's highly unlikely to have 100% participation.
They never.
You see, I
An absolute.
highly unlikely.
Do absolute.
The proposed budget in front of you, we just talked about how they. The committee, are there any other questions? There's no documents anywhere there's no supporting document for this item. It's only here since it was just a cost estimate. It wasn't a chart or a rate. Any questions on that item? The committee requested rate information related to funding depreciation or CIP at 95% and 100% levels, as Ms. Jordan mentioned earlier in the meeting. Those rate tables are included, and we'll get to those in the next section. So we have included proposed rates at the 90%, which is static with what we had in February. We wanted to keep that the same until the committee looked at it and made a determination. We've also provided rates for you at 95 and 100% so that you can have all the information you need to make that decision. The committee requested to see rates to ramp up our rates for possible $35 million USDA loan debt beginning in fiscal year 27-28. After we discussed that a little further, I kind of looked at the forecast for interest rates and funding rates. We decided now would probably not be the best time to look at that item. Interest rates, as you know, are projected to decline between now and 2028. So it could be that at closing our loan rates are lower. And there are a lot of variables still undetermined at this time. We don't know that the construction costs are going to come in and how much of that 35 million. So we thought it may be a little premature right now. Maybe we can revisit this in the fall when we got a better estimate. The design is completed. We're looking at bidding them and kind of know what those numbers are going to be. Have a little more perspective on those numbers before we started ramping up rates to collect the debt. So there's nothing in your agenda packages today for that. Staff suggests that it be revisited maybe September or October of this year. We should have more reliable numbers to make long-term forecasts at that time.
You sure that that's late enough? I would think it would be after November.
It could be, but we could reconsider it in September and October and see where we stand at that point. If the process is far enough along in the bidding process, we may have enough time.
I think that's a good point. I'd like to add that we didn't want to space this out too far from today's meeting. We knew that we weren't going to present anything today. We don't want to kick it down the road too far. We know that in the past, we've often had a finance committee meeting in September, October, and you are correct. We will have bids out for the first phase of the construction project in July, August. The second one could be October. It may be a good time in October to talk about this. It may be November, December, but I think that the point is that we want to make sure that we engage in discussion with the finance committee before we start preparing, or as we're preparing for our next fiscal year budget. as well, because I don't think we ever stop looking at our budgets and preparing, but fall may be a good time for that. So if the finance committee is okay with that, we will look at a future meeting and having that discussion. Okay, so that was the 35 million USDA loan rate. I'd like to back up for discussion, stay on section 3 here for a match discussion. So as we mentioned, our current budget proposal includes keeping the 2% match static. And I believe that the finance committee wanted to look at least be able to appreciate what the additional cost was for that, to see if there was any suggestion to increase that percentage for that item.
I'm not ready to make a decision on that one yet.
We're gonna 12,
I would like to go up to 2%, but
you mean 3?
3, sorry, yeah. And we only have the project, let's see, right now, based on employee participation, it would be an increase of 12,000. Worst case is everybody jumps in and it's 34.
That's correct.
It's not bad. If potentially we were facing someone who's trying to decide if they want to stay or go based upon the 401k, 12,000 is a drop in the bucket to keep that person.
Yes.
Five
The
money.
value of it.
Not I'm fine with that.
Me too. Yeah.
So the committee is directing us to, I heard you discussing amongst yourselves.
Was there a decision on?
So the discussion was, if the current cost based upon the current participation would be 12,000. My comment was 12,000 is not that much. And if we had an employee who was trying to decide whether to come on board or stay, and if $12,000 is what we would be looking at to keep that person, it's more advantageous to do that. So yes, that discussion was, we were both in favor of that extra percent.
So be clear, I think that we're looking at adding 1% to the 2% to make it 3% total.
Correct.
And based on your comment, I think that you're saying when we do some of our marketing and employee attraction, having that 3% is the value.
Is a value, absolutely.
Okay, very
As
good.
well as a value to retain key talent.
Exactly. By 1%.
I think we're trying to be on the path to get to 5%, like most everybody else. So if a potential employee is thinking about that, we're looking at 2 more years before we get there.
Yeah,
So that shouldn't deter anyone.
correct. Because they know we're trying to get there.
They should be able to see
the progression. Yeah.
And it should help the current employees that participate in the program.
Richard,
Keep bringing more participation.
can I ask you if participation has gone up with the changes that we've made?
I anticipated that question. You didn't catch me cold today. This morning I went back and looked because there was some discussion earlier about when we started the program and what the participation rates were and did the match have an
Make a
effect.
difference, yeah.
So I went back this morning and pulled some pretty cool summaries and glanced at that. So as we mentioned in the previous meeting, just brief history, the pay study that was implemented 7/1 of 2019 recommended 5%, 1% a year for 5 years to the end of the study. Get us to the 5% to be competitive. That was presented to the board on April 16th of 2019. July the 1st of 2019 is when we adopted the new pay study. At that time, the interim director deferred the 401k implementation because he was an interim director and felt it was better to have the Scott on board, which was coming before that program was implemented. So the first year we participated was 7/1 of 20. We were at 1%. That year we had 13 participants a month before it was implemented. We went to 17 participants on July the 1st. So theoretically, if you assume all four of those jumped on board because of the match, you increase for employees. 7/1 of 23 last year, Finance Committee wanted to move the 1% to the 2% match. So in June of 23, we still had 16 employees. Of those 17, still 16. 7/1 of 23 stayed static. And then now we're up to 19%. So last year, to answer your question, doesn't look like the 1% boosted participation. But it's hard to tell because last year we had a high turnover rate. So you have a lot of long-term employees or longer-term employees that were leaving and some newer employees coming on that may have been young or may not. So it's
The rate is at 19 employees right now.
currently as of February, we have 19 participants being matched. That's correct.
Alright.
Out of 47, which is 41%.
Well,
Okay.
41% is not bad from my experience with payroll as far as statistics.
It's more than I had been advised on it back in 2020, so I'm grateful. Nobody thought that anybody would make a difference, but it's good.
That's correct. If you go way back prior to 2020, prior to 2019, when the new pay study came on, I believe it was in the 5 or 6 employee range. 42.
Wow. Okay.
that's good.
Doing something right.
Yeah.
So the next bullet item is related to rate information related to funding asset depreciation at 95% and 100% levels. Currently, we're at 90% funding asset depreciation. And on the top of page 11, this item 3B rates to fund depreciation at 95% and 100% levels. We've got a table of values here for you. So Richard, if you would walk us through that table as well.
Rather than going through the tables, basically just to discuss the rates themselves. If you look at the rates on the next page on page 12, then we'll look at the chart. You see the proposed rates at 90%, which is what's being brought to you in the budget and the ordinance and so forth today. If you compare that to page 11, the 95% funding and the 100% funding, I want to point out one thing, and that is that you will see the volume rates do not change. Now, we know that's true because CIP is designed to come out of your base rate because of the capital improvement. So one thing, regardless of your funding level, it does not affect your base rates. I mean, your volume rates. It will affect your base rates. So if you look at the proposed rate, let's say for a 3/4 inch meter, the combined rate at 90% funding is $44.91. That's your typical residential base rate, $44.91. At 95%, it would go to $46.28. Under the 100%, it would go to $47.65, which is an increase of roughly $3.01. So that's the typical residential effect it would have between the funding levels. On the chart, it's a little easier to see because that's where we take the parts that you saw at the last meeting, 1,000 user, 0 user, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. And we stack that so that you can see in purple, those are the proposed rates. That's the budget you have before you today. Now, of course, we know we just changed one item, which is 401k funding, but that will not change these numbers.
Okay.
If it does, it would be one
What
cent.
about the merit increase and all that? That's
Already built in.
already built in.
Everything that you saw in the first meeting is already built into these. And now the changes that Scott brought to you earlier since the first meeting are built into these. So you'll see the purple is in the proposed budget at 90%. The blue is what those bills would go to if you would go to 95%. And the orange, kind of the reddish orange, is what it would be at 100%. So you'll notice, bringing to your attention one thing, we talked about base rate. You go to the 0 customer. Customers are not using any water, but they're paying a base rate. You'll see that the base rate did increase between those three scenarios because as you fund, a minute ago, as you fund capital improvement, it's coming out of base rates, not volume rates. And you'll see that same increase flow through all of the other bills. So regardless of whether it's a 0 user or a 10,000 gallon user, the difference in the funding between 90% and 100% would be $2.74 basically. So That's your difference to get to a higher funding level. So again, I just point out that it's affecting your base rate, not your volume rate. So it will not affect different customers as you go up the usage scale differently. It should be the same for all customers.
What was that value again? $2 and
$2.74.
$2.74.
And that's a residential user. Now, of course, we're not talking commercial larger meters. Those would all depend on meters. And I know that's a lot of data and tables to throw at you. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to clarify.
I think it's important for me just to repeat that one more time, Richard. When you talked about base charge, do that again as far as how that 274 is reflected in your volume. Again, what's the relationship?
When you change operating expenses, it'll come out of the volume rate. That's how it's funded.
Mhm.
When you change the capital improvement funding, it only affects base rate because our rate model is designed to capture 100% capital improvement in the base rate.
Okay.
And a high percentage of debt service, which we're not talking about now, but so that's what your base rate. So funding of depreciation will not affect your volume rates at all. Residential, non-residential, water, sewer, none of those will be affected by CIP funding. It will only affect your base rates.
Okay.
Base rates for sewer, base rates for water.
So at the bottom that says volume charge and residential tier 1, it shows a 6% increase.
That's correct. But that 6% increase is from prior rates to proposed rates. And it doesn't change between the 90, the 95, and the 100. So
Oh, I see. It's 90% depreciation. I see it now.
yeah, that's caused by the 1 million operating increases we've seen in the operating costs. Remember, we discussed that in the first meeting. So these proposed rates at 90%, if you compare that, don't compare your proposed rates to last year because that's your 6% volume. But if you look at that, if you look at the 90 versus the 95 versus 100, volume rates are the same. Percentage increases are the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see that now.
Right.
The base charge goes up if we go up with the depreciation.
That's
Okay, I see it now.
So unlike operating expenses that we talked about at the first meeting, which does change from your usage levels, your 0 customer, your 10,000 customer, it does affect them differently. In your funding depreciation, it affects all customers in that class, being a residential customer or 3/4 inch meter customer. It affects all customers the same to fund depreciation, regardless of whether you're a 0 user or a 10,000 user or a 20,000 user. Does that make sense? Or do I confuse you a little more?
No, it does, but I'm looking at it now and I'm looking at the number for non-residential. It's a $1.45 increase. And residential, in tier 2 people is $1.80. Why is non-residential so much lower? And there's not a volume. That's $1.45 per 1,000 gallons?
You're looking at the volume charges,
Yes, sir.
and you're asking why the non-residential volume rate is lower than the residential rate. That's the way the rate model was built, based on the board's recommendation for the rate model when Raftellus built the rate model last year. They built it so that non-residential customers, the high usage customers, have a lower volume rate, but they still account for a larger
Okay.
chunk of your total revenue stream.
Kind of like getting a discount.
No, but
And I know that was a year or two ago, but that's the way the rate model is designed.
Where did this chart?
it's right.
She's referring. I'm not sure.
They will.
The 3 things we see. Okay. We can place the rates.
Go back to the.
Okay, before and after. Okay.
Jimmy's not going to be happy.
Hmm.
What do you think, Jim? We're the one who want to go up in depreciation.
What?
What are the disadvantages of not going up in depreciation? I asked that question. Or are there any?
The revenue we have towards, well, the CIP fund in the future, mainly. Is that correct?
That is correct. Well, do you want to answer that question?
If we need.
That is strictly tied to the designated fund balance in the CIP plan. That's correct. So right now, 90% funding, we are 240,000 unfunded, if you will. So that's $250,000, let's say, a year that Scott does not have available to put in his CIP plan to fund true capital improvement. That's the difference, right?
And I would like to, if I may, Mr. Huge, I'd like to mention this, that we have 2 projects going on this next year related to the AIA grants that we received, one for water and one for sewer. Total, I think, was $350,000 for those grants. So that work is going on presently. The majority of that work is to go out and identify assets in their condition and for them to come up with schedules for replacement schedules. So we're going to be in a position possibly later this fall where we're going to have those schedules know have a better picture basically of the condition of those assets, and they're going to be driving our CIP. That's how the link is. So it may be appropriate to, even though we've looked at this today, to wait for some of that information to come in so that we have a broader view of what does this replacement schedule look like in terms of all of our assets across our service area, and look at what is the funded depreciation at 90% in relationship to that schedule. And at that point, we may be looking at a deficit in terms of what we need to spend versus what the 90% is bringing in. It starts to bring in some perspective as it's related to the demand out there for these additional assets that we're identifying. So at least wanted to make sure that you understood that as well. And I think there was some discussion at the previous meeting of at least having a goal to reach a greater percentage. And I think our recommendation was within the next 5 years was a recommendation coming from our team because of some of these things that are occurring. So I just wanted to remind the board or the finance committee of that as well, as you're making your decision here on kind of where to go with these percentages and possibly the timing of that.
Richard, do you remember when we went to 80%?
Yes. This morning when I was looking for the 401k information.
I didn't ask.
I came across on 7/1 of 2019.
Yeah.
That's when it was reduced to implement. And one of the reasons was to implement the pay study rates. The board didn't want to raise the rates for the full amount of the pay study. So to offset that, they went to 80 with a goal to get back to 100 within 5 years. And of course, the board has raised it back up to 90. So we've gone from 80, 7/1 of 2019, it went to 80, went from 100 to 80. And now we're back to
So, as best I remember, we've been at 100% depreciation up to that point.
that's correct.
And also, I was thinking when we went to the 80, that kind of came with a warning that we need to be careful and not stay there.
That's correct. Director had a memo, I believe, for the boards in that board meeting, for the July board meeting of the June, when the rates were adopted. And his recommendation was that a new director coming on board and the board look at a 5-year plan. And I think in that memo, he may have discussed the fact that long-term non-funding of capital improvement not only causes you infrastructure problems, but it could cause you LGC problems because they're expecting you to fund depreciation at some point at a reasonable level. Now, do they consider reasonable 90? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But that was the discussion that you're remembering back then.
My understanding is when we do this study, it's going to tell us what the level needs to be.
Well, wait.
And we may be in a position where we're playing catch up.
I don't think
That's
so.
what I don't want.
I really don't think. And we just got that $500,000 grant, which is going to help with the PFAS, which is in the CIP plan.
Correct.
So that's going to help offset some of the cost out there. So if we're 248,000 short on projects, CIP, that $500,000 is going to free up some more money to possibly get those done. As long as nothing breaks or collapses in the next year.
It's
I
true.
mean, I'm just,
Very
we
true.
did get a $500,000 grant and we have to remember that that's there.
And look, it may not have any effect in the next year. but
Right.
it's going to have an effect down the road.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's when you're saying we may have to play catch up.
Yeah, and that's when you have to play catch up, and that's when you're going to have to go to a huge
First,
increase. Yeah, it
chicken up.
concerns me because a lot of times when you got your CIP is underfunded,
Mhm.
your maintenance kind of lags, and then you start that downhill,
Right.
where the ball keeps rolling downhill and keeps rolling faster and faster. So I want to make sure that we're not facing that in the future.
We can reprioritize some of the CIP, right? We can always reprioritize the CIP
Well, you would have to reprioritize the CIP, and it's
to
normal.
do it every year anyway, right?
It's normal for organizations, from my experience, to have more projects on your schedule than you can afford. And it's you manage those based on their condition, and you move things around based on the dollars that you have, and look for grant funding and so on and so forth. So it's something that we do, and it's something that a schedule will be bringing to the full board in July. It won't be part of this budget, because we recommended at the last meeting that we bring the schedule to you in July once we know the numbers supporting the CIP. But yeah, that is the challenge as far as managing that CIP. Keep in mind that we have additional projects that we haven't identified the funding yet for, in terms of the water plant, the PFAS. We're anticipating a $10 to $20 million project for PFAS removal, which isn't on the schedule yet as far as the CIP. And then something that you'll also see is that we've picked up some additional assets since the improvement of the water plant, because these are new assets now that have to be maintained. And we all understand that we have this wonderful I-85 project coming up with new assets. So eventually those assets will make it onto the schedule that have to be maintained then throughout their life, which can be 30, 50 years as well, that we take a look at. So a lot of things are going to be coming onto the schedule in the next 5 years. That's true. So we do have some opportunities to get some better data in the next year towards that. But we may be in that situation where we see truly what our asset schedule looks like in terms of replacement, and recognize that the 90% isn't enough. And even when you get to 100%, it still may not be enough where you would like to be. But those are the decisions that we have to make as the organization to understand how and when to push those items out and get them done.
The only caveat I would also add to that discussion is, as the USDA project does come online, part of the criteria that was in the letter of conditions presented to the board is that you do create a CIP plan, so to speak, for all the assets being put in operation due to that loan. So you will, when that comes online, when I-85 comes online, if that's 70 million or whatever it turns out to be, your depreciation will no longer be 2.4 million. Now you've got to depreciate 70 million at a life, maybe 50 years. Some of the assets would be less than 50 years pump stations. But that number in the future is going to grow. And now 90% of that number is a lot different than 90% of 2.4 million. So just keep that in mind 5 years out, 4 years out. But that additional condition.
So this is where my memory is. 2020 to 2021, we were at 80. 22 to 23, 22, we went up to 85. In 23, we went up to 90, and we're at 90 right now.
I don't remember.
I don't remember exactly when it's.
But yes, we went
from 80 to 85 to 90 in a matter of 4 years. From 2020 to 2024.
That's correct. That is correct.
And
So we could stay
think about it.
just where we are.
Think about it from this direction. If we can get to 100, when all the new assets comes on, that number goes up. Then we have the opportunity to drop back to 95 or 90 to avoid future rate increases. As that CIP number goes up. It's a lot to think about, and it's
Yes, and just to add a little bit on top of that, just for consideration, when you build this project, we're looking at potentially over a given amount of years doubling our customer base.
Yes.
Yeah. So then what does that do? That increases your revenues as well. So you now have a revenue increase, which now you look at, you possibly have the revenues available to manage through that where you're not taking your depreciation up and down. You have it actually fund what you need to fund. So that's part of the calculations that we're looking at as well.
There'll be additional revenue due to growth.
Exactly. Yeah. So
We can't project that yet.
That's why I'm saying, I think this year we should stay at 90. We don't have any growth yet. Next year is going to be different. I just think it wouldn't kill us to stay at 90 for one more year. That's my opinion. And that's the truth.
I guess the caveat is if we don't change it to 95, then as opposed to looking at, let's say the volume at $1.38, is that going to be $3 of an increase? And will it double? That's my only concern.
Yeah, because this is at 90 right now. The $1.38 is at 90.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But if we didn't do it this year, we wait another year.
No, because I think there's going to be growth in this year.
Yeah.
Especially in Denver.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. Is if we live another year,
And
that 5% is going to be $3 increase rather than
$1.
$1.
Crystal, would you roll back to the table on the top of page 11?
There it is.
That might help you in terms of looking at.
See the residential.
We sit at 90% now, and you look at the table that says 95. If you're looking at that base charge at 3/4 inch meter, you see that increase at $1.60.
Oh,
Well,
right.
the base charge goes up, but the volume charge goes
The
up.
volume charges stay the same, and to your point that if you take that jump to 100%, it's a $3.01 increase in addition to where we sit today at 90%. So that's a 10% increase in depreciation. That's out to $3.01 in that area of 100%.
People will probably freak out.
Is
Is everything else?
All right, Richard, you ready?
What am I ready for?
I have no
You're
idea.
probably not ready for it, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because you know I ask this question every year. If we don't increase rates at all, and we leave this at 90%, how much fund balance are we going to need to balance this budget? I think you told us in our last meeting, 1 point something million dollars.
Approximately 1 million. Approximately 1 million, 1.1 million. We increased the budget from the last time to this time by 100,000 for those position changes. So coming into the last meeting, we were looking at, and the way we calculate that is we say, okay, some of the discretionary expenses are what they are, chemicals, electricity. Hey, you do have some control over pay benefits somewhat within the budgetary work we've got. But if all of those things were what they're going to be, but we didn't raise any more revenue than we did this year, what would the ordinance look like? And the ordinance would be basically 1 million in the red. It'd be 1 million in the red, 1 million use of fund balance. So we're still at the 1.1 million in the red. Well, I will put one caveat. If revenues come in, as we saw in quarterly financial projections, this year revenue is trending slightly higher than the rate model projected. If you made that assumption that next year it's going to be higher than the rate model projections are, but you're gambling on this trend being a true trend, long-term trend. And then you may only be 750,000 in the red, but you're still significantly in fund balance. That's what I guess I'm saying.
But it's a realistic trend.
I'm sorry.
It's a realistic trend with possible growth on the horizon. In the county, especially in the county.
I don't think you'll see growth,
Not this year.
significant growth in 24, 25, especially on the side that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Construction is not just barely underway.
Yeah.
So I, in the rate model, we have not built in significant growth in the 24, 25 rate model.
Yeah.
That's coming down the road.
You would have to have housing developments
Already
finished
in order to see
in
that.
order to
if Brames would print, if Brames would build, that would be one. They've already got their allocation. They can build.
But they can't build in time to get it in 24, 25. If they started today, it would be 3 to 4 years out before we would see the revenue.
Before you saw the change.
Yeah. Because you got to build the houses, you got to, people have to move in.
And use the water for all.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're talking, 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Get it anymore.
That's a tough.
It's gonna come back.
We hope so.
So the non-billing revenue for this past year was over $300,000, if I remember.
So it's you say the past year, the year we're in now? or-
Yeah, the last financial report that you sent us, I think it was,
Have that in front of me, but
that's all fine. And then the interest income was more than we had planned.
that is correct. We just did a budget amendment significant. Now, I will say that Ruben and I were in a management advisory meeting February, January.
February, I think.
With bankers, and their warning to all the finance directors there was do not base your digital budget on interest revenue for 24, 25, you know, what it was currently, or you're building a house of cards. They warned everyone that you need to look at least a 50% reduction of current year revenue because all the Fed rates are projected to drop. Now, they also said, but the last year, all of those projections have not proven true.
Right.
So it could be that next year we wind up with a much more significant income than we project. But that is again a gap. That's a big gamble.
Not guaranteed.
Build your budget on that. You're
And all I'm saying is that money is, I know we put it in our budget. Do we put that in our budget? We budget the non-billing revenue,
yes, not
the interest income as revenue.
that's not.
It's just that we have, between those two numbers, we had a significant amount and we could use that money to fund the budget. That I think that total, when I looked at the numbers, I thought it totaled up to very close to $1 million.
The ordinance that Scott presented to you a little earlier on page 7 includes $397,800 in
Right.
non-billing revenue. So just say 400,000 for the
Interest income.
And as you can see, as you said, with interest revenue, you're looking at $1 million. And
Very
that's
close to $1 million.
Now, they are already built into covering your operating expenses. So they're not extra revenue. If you take those out of the equation, your rates would have to skyrocket another $1 million.
So there's no cushion.
They're built in. It's just
No cushion. See where you're going, but
there's only a cushion if those revenues come in above the $1 million that's already
there, gotcha.
in the budget. That's correct.
So we're back to where we were.
Which is possible, but we won't know that
Yeah, until
until it
later.
happens.
We've got tax increases for all our people in the county. We've got,
That's not guaranteed either because people can contest.
right, but most of them will probably get increases a lot. You haven't done your budget.
We're working.
STEM has increased their taxes. Creedmoor's going to increase their taxes, maybe. We're looking at those numbers now too. I don't know what the county's going to do. I just can't. Our stormwater fees are going up. If our taxes go up in the county and the taxes go up in the city, I can't live with we're raising the rates at SGWASA too. I will be tarred and feathered. And where are these people going to get this money from? That's the question. Everything's going up except income.
The only good side is everything is going up. So if we were to increase it, everything is going up. So it's not like it's SGWASA all by itself. It's
true.
Everything.
Commissioner,
The blow would be
I
less.
know we're talking rates in relationship to depreciation.
Yes.
So if and then you mixed in, if we don't raise the rates, what's the effect on fund balance? So I'm just trying to figure out maybe how to, at this point, bring the discussion back to funding depreciation. if there's consideration by the committee to stay where we are or increase depreciation. And then we can move to the other topic if you want to look at as far as using fund balance for the budget. I kind of see them a little bit separate. I mean, they're-
Got it. I understand.
Schedules, but I'm just trying to.
It's the.
And that's why I'm saying I want to stay at 90%. We can stay at 90% for another year. It's not going to kill us. I think we're going to be fine at 90% for one more year. It's not.
I don't know, the way I look at it is you're kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Because 90%, 95% next year may be a much higher
Higher
rate
rate.
increase than this year.
But we've gone up from 80 to 90 in 4 years. I mean, it stayed stagnant for 2
We were
years.
supposed to do it in 5, back to 100.
I know, but
That
we
was
can't
right.
always do what we can't always do what we want to do. And we've got a lot of projects going on.
And that's the whole point, because we do have a lot of projects going on.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to do, I mean, I don't want to, but I'd rather increase $1 rather than $3 next time. It's like you said, it is kicking the can down the road either now or later. What we have to do.
Oh, and we know we have to do it. We absolutely know we have to do it.
And look, I don't want to increase rates either. I hate having to increase rates because of all the flack we get from it. Not only the flack from people on social media, the flack I get at home.
I mean, right now, people are losing their houses. People are losing their homes. Foreclosure rates are going up. People can't live in their homes because the interest rates have gone so high. And there's people with they can't buy cars, they can't buy homes. And it's bad. And I just don't want to add to their misery. I can take the flack if I can justify it. And we changed the rate structure last year. We didn't raise rates. We didn't touch fund balance last year, right? We didn't touch fund balance last year at all.
In the current budget.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
And you still talk flack about the rate structure.
Because they didn't understand it. It was the best thing we could do for some people.
Well, if we keep it at 90%, there's still an increase.
Yeah, there is. The 1% versus a 4%.
Right.
1% on the base charge. 6%.
4%.
6% on the volume charge. Versus 6% versus 6%.
So you're talking 44.91 versus a 46.28 at 95.
Right here. Volume 64 or $3.01. We're not going up to 100. I know that's not going to happen.
95.
Look at these numbers here.
That's the numbers I'm looking at.
Okay. Look at the numbers over here.
When you look at it, that it's kind of
These
interesting.
numbers versus this number.
Mhm.
38, 38, 38.
838 is at 100%.
Yeah,
Oh, 90.
that's the
90.
one. It's at 90%.
It's not that much different. Still, but the specific dollar amount is, the percentage is large, but the impact is smaller.
$1.38 thousand gallons. Right? The increase is $1.30 per 1,000 gallons for the volume charge. That's
correct.
the difference.
But if you're talking about funding the depreciation,
Yes.
I would stay above, out of the volume charges, because regardless of whether you're looking at 90, 95, or 100%, those volume charges are what they are because of operating expenses. So that's just the second discussion Scott was talking about.
Yeah, it's the base.
Raising. But so your funding depreciation is only affecting your base.
Your base, right.
Again. So just to give you some perspective, if you look at the second table that you've got, which is on page 12.
Well, the one at 90%.
That's correct. You got your current rates and you got your 90% rates where the baseline budget is built. That base charge is going to go up 27 cents because of some additional operating expenses that do affect base. 27 cents. If you go to 95% funding, it won't affect that customer's bill and volume at all.
Right.
But it will raise their base fee to 164. Okay.
Mhm.
And similarly going across, if you went to 100%, it would raise their base bill $3.01. So 27 is baked into the proposed budget unless you just say we're going to use fund balance and not base rate.
Got it.
So if we go to 95 or 100, the only thing that's going to change is base charge.
That is
The
correct.
volume rate is going to stay where it is right now.
That's right. Sure. The 6% and 7% that you're seeing in your volume rates that is concerning you are not related to your depreciation funded. They are related to the operating expenses of an increase this year of $1 million, your electricity, your chemicals, your insurances, your paying benefits. So those are set aside from your funding of depreciation discussion, really. And that's what's starting. I think you're rolling them all into a rate increase discussion, and they're totally separate.
Okay.
Because one is a flat dollar effect on a base rate. Doesn't matter if you're a 0 user or a 10,000 gallon user. As long as you're a residential user, it's going to be an increase that we just talked about from 27 cents to what was it, 164.
164.
Right. So $1.37 more per month on your bill to fund depreciation 5% more. So if you look at it that way, it's a little clearer to understand. If you get down in the volume rates, now we're talking about your operating budget. That has nothing to do with
this.
funding depreciation.
Well, what do you think, Ruben?
Well, on for the ride.
We move on to something else.
No, I think we have to make a decision.
I don't want to.
Excuse me?
You were saying, can we move on to something else? I think we have to make a decision here, don't we not?
What's the point?
When you go to a public hearing, you have to decide what your funding is depreciation is going to be in your rates, because you can't set the rates without knowing that.
That's right.
You can kick your public hearing out a month and have another meeting, but that's the only option for that.
So are there any changes in the rates, the fees? Late payment fee, we know that's going up, right?
Well, that's a completely different discussion, and there are some tweaks in those rates, and we're going to be identified those next.
Right.
That is correct.
But my thought process is that it's going to bring in more revenue. It's going to offset some of the.
That is, and we have some notes to that effect.
I knew you would. You're so good.
I looked at this.
Is it going to make up for $1 million?
That's what you're thinking.
No, it's not.
That's where you will not. That's calculations.
So I throw it out there.
We were hoping that it could. When we get to there, you'll see that you're talking about $75,000 increase in projected revenue due to those fee changes, not $1 million.
Yeah, no.
So that's not going to solve it. But that is a really viable thing to look at.
We don't have too many options. It's either stay at 90 or go to 95.
Not going to 100.
I don't think we can do 100. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable doing 100, but I would be comfortable doing 95.
And plus, this is our recommendation.
Right.
That's true.
And that doesn't mean that they're gonna.
Agreed.
They could say something else.
They can decide to go to 100. They can decide to go to 90.
I promise you, they will not
Thank you.
decide to go to 100. There's no doubt in my mind that this board will not go to 100.
You might be surprised.
We can propose 95, see what they say.
Recommended, so the committee wants to take a 95%.
No, we don't, but we will. We don't want to do any of it, but we will.
Okay. Very good.
Come back and say, hey,
Go back and
go back and try again.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Great,
Very good.
great discussion. Item 3C, FY 24-25 rate review. We've already touched on that somewhat, but I think that we need to spend some time on page 12, proposed rates, and also
We did.
page 13, bill comparison residential. I just thought we'd give the board an opportunity to take a look at that. If you're satisfied that
Yeah,
we can move on to item 4.
yeah, we were kind of looking at that.
Okay.
Lori and
So,
Very good. Then if it's okay, we'll move on to item 4, which is the fiscal year 24-25 review of rates, fees, and charges schedule. For this item, you have 2 documents at your desktop. You should have one that is what we call a red line version. Then you also have a non-red line version. So the red line version obviously are all the changes that we made.
okay.
And then we have a clean version reflecting all of the changes that were made in that document. So as we've done in years past, we tend to highlight what changes we've made in that document. As you can see, we took the time this year to scrub the document in terms of some formatting, in terms of some text amendments, some updates, some grammar, those type of things to make things more clear. We've also combined some things. Yes, we thank Crystal for that as well.
thank you, Crystal.
And so I thought it was appropriate for this meeting to at least let the committee see all the text amendments and rates, reflects new rates in certain areas, if you will. And then we can select how the finance committee would like to move through this list of, I think, 8 separate sections covering water rates and fees all the way through schedule of miscellaneous charges and fees. I have highlighted a couple of items here. You'll see on this first page that the late payment fee in section 4.1 has been updated, but I don't want to skip over any of the other fees and updates. When you look at section 2.2 and 2.3, for example, which we see on screen, those base charges and volume charges, those fees reflect basically what we just talked about. So again, they appear in this document with an explanation. So it's kind of a repeat of what we talked about here. So be happy to go through this document page by page, certain sections. If the committee would just let us know how you'd like to proceed, glad to do that. And again, this document is not in your packet because of its length. So I'm not scrolling on screen for that unless you have a copy of it. Do you have a copy of it, Crystal?
Transfer it if you like.
Okay.
Before. Oh, my God.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Security deposit.
Under security deposits on table 9,
What page is that in the book?
page 11. Residential security deposit when social security number is not provided or verified. I didn't know we had something like that. I was just amazed.
$300 level.
Yeah.
That's been in place for several years now.
How often do we?
We do more and more because, of course, people are becoming more and more uncomfortable giving out social security numbers. So we do run into that more and more often. The reason that's in place, just to remind the committee, is that was put in place because without a social security number, you can't seek that set up collection through the state program.
Right.
So if you don't verify that a customer leaves owing you a significant amount of money, you have no debt collection mechanism do it. So we raised the deposit to try to at least offset what could possibly be. And that's the equivalent of what, at that time, a typical customer could leave you with 3 bills. And that was typical of, okay, that kind of was breaking.
That makes sense.
It's no longer.
At that time, I'm like, it's not typical any longer. It should probably be 500 by now.
It depends on the customer now that we changed the rate structure. Actually, 300 if you were a
Still covers that.
low-end user, it would still be significant. Now, if you're a 10,000 gallon user, yes, it cover 2 months at best, probably not 2.
Now, when we do our thing at the end of the year where we've got people who left and didn't pay their bills and stuff like that,
That's correct.
this $300 is already calculated in the number you give us?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Didn't know it existed. Got our system development fees instead of our allocation fees. Are those numbers similar? Or is there going to be a higher rate, or I'm sure
It's been used interchangeably, kind of synonymously over the years. We call it an allocation, but these are your system development fees. So they're kind of one in the same. So we have our chart out there from the last time that these fees were updated in, I think it was July of 2019, I think was our previous, we're working on that project now. Our vendor, Bill Associates, who's working on that project, has a final report to submit to us. I think it's next week. And they're going to provide me with a timetable for our required public hearing and public comment period before the board can review that document. But they have finished their review, and there is a recommended change to those system development fees. And that'll be part of the report and show you what that is. Now, I was trying to time that up with the approval of the budget because that table is in here, but we just couldn't sync it in time. So I think with all the required hearings and comment period, most likely you'll be looking at this document, maybe approval in June.
I did find the system development fee chart.
Now, maybe you're approving the budget in June. Maybe it will time up together on your schedule. If not, it will be in July. It's something that you have to get done. We want to get done.
Look at she's on. So there's really just text changes. There's not anything substantial that changed in fees except for late payment.
If you'd like to go to payment fee schedule, that's on in section 4.1. We're proposing a change in the fee from $5 to $10. Richard, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yes. So that is a late fee. Yes. So, Ms. Kaczynski, to your point earlier, the projection is that if it does the increase from a minimum of $5 to $10 for a late fee, if that does not change payment patterns, in other words, customers pay late, it'll be late in the past. That's projected to be a roughly approximately 90,000 extra revenue. If you assume that some customers will change and start paying before the late fee date, with this new fee being higher, I think realistically 75,000 could be budgeted for revenue.
This number is comparative with other water companies in the area.
You'll see a mixed bag of $5 and $10. $10 is not uncommon anymore. That's correct.
Yeah, we're actually very low.
I think that was part of the discussion at the last meeting.
Just $15, maybe $20. Yeah, we're low. Oxford is 15, if I'm not mistaken.
At 1.5% of the balance. Okay.
Yeah, we're low. Yeah. Actually, it's $10.
Like you said the last time.
Yeah. $35 charge on it's $15.
Wow.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Anything further in the document that you'd like to discuss?
You caught up with everybody else. I'll say that.
Finally. Okay, I'm gonna get some sort of-
Exactly.
No idea.
All right. Shall we move on or? Richard, I would like to point out one thing about the rate schedule in front of you now that you've changed your 90% fund and 95% in your recommendation. That will be reflected in, so when you get your proposed budget,
Yeah.
you won't see those exact numbers. You will see that 95% number in there now, which I think we said earlier was some difference in the base rate. So you will see, I didn't want you to look back at today's table and the one that you see when you get the proposed public budget and public hearing and say, well, the number changed. The number will change slightly because you.
Right.
Number will change. Number will change. Is that what you're saying?
The base
Budget number. will
Base- the
change.
base-
No, your base fees in your rate schedule
It will change.
will change slightly based on a few things that you've decided here today. They increase your 401k percentage.
All right. It's just not the 95.
Yeah.
Appreciation of 95%. And then we will increase fee revenues if you're fine with the $5 to $20. We'll increase that fee revenue by 75,000, which will actually
Get down.
bring down the operating rate. So that will bring your volume rate down a little bit. So you're adding 12,000 worth of. Hey, but you're bringing.
That's a little good news today. I'll take it.
So I'm just giving you a heads up that your rates will. be
Numbers won't-
slightly different.
Right.
Those decisions than these.
And you don't want me to do this?
No, and I just didn't want there to be questions in the public or the board next month when you see slides from rates. All right, the next item in front of us is item 5, the fiscal year 24-25 personnel and position review. We have some proposed organizational charts to go through, as well as reviewing current classification schedules and proposed classification schedules. Priscilla Adcock is here today, our HR manager. She's here to assist as necessary for any questions. I believe before the meeting started, one of the handouts that was requested that had not been included was our current fiscal year 23-24 organizational charts. So I believe the finance committee members have a copy of that chart in front of them as well for reference. So suffice to say,
There should be another one.
we're looking for proposed additional employees and the reclassification of an existing position. I'll just kind of cover that again. We're looking for including or adding in our fiscal year 24-25 budget 2 new entry-level utility operator positions versus 3. And this adjustment was made to fund the utility engineer's position in FY 24-25. Utility engineer's position was going to be unfunded in FY 24-25 while an engineering director was hired. However, this has changed. You can see from the table below, the board approved total FTEs, full-time equivalents was 47. We're proposing for fiscal year 24-25, full-time equivalents equal 49. PTE or part-time equivalents, 0, no change there. Contractual and unfunded, 0 across the bottom at that table. If we move on to the next page, 5A, which is the fiscal year 24-25 proposed organizational chart. You see on this chart from the top, and Crystal, let's keep it on the top there. Thank you. In essence, what we did on this chart in comparison to our chart last year was I had a engineering director in position as well as a utility engineer on that chart. And we still have the utility engineer, as you can see, utility engineer operations manager 1. It's one of the blue boxes. And I've elevated the engineering director's position up to, and we're making a change to assistant director. So you see that as a gold box, yellow between myself, the executive director, and the row of our directors and managers on the line below. Also, further down in the chart, you'll notice that we've added, if you'll scroll down a little bit for me, Crystal. Okay, you can see in red text in terms of water treatment, superintendent area, we have added one as far as an operator. Moving to the right, when you see the wastewater treatment plant, superintendent box below that, you see an operator add one. So that equates to the two positions that were requested to be added to the FY 24-25 budget. So I will pause there to see if the committee members have any questions or comments. Okay, very good. Moving forward, item 5B, the FY 23-24 classification schedule. So this was something that was presented to the finance committee members at the previous budget meeting in February. To give you an idea of what the chart will look existing. And then as we build our percentage increases across the board, we are presenting to you then what the FY 24-25 classification schedule looks like, and that's item 5C. I'm not sure if, so that's on page 20. Here we go. So here's our proposed 2024 classification schedule, and these values for minimum, midpoint, and maximum have been updated by the 3% that we talked about earlier at the February Finance Committee meeting, and we also reviewed again today. So I'd be happy to pause there and answer any questions that the board may have.
We haven't had any interns, have we? The intern at the top of the scale, that's an unpaid
We
position.
haven't, but we are going to have one. Would you like to have Priscilla come up and talk to us about that? Priscilla?
Priscilla says, I am not ready for that.
Oh, I'm always ready.
Priscilla, if you would, introduce yourself for the record, please.
I am Priscilla Adcock. I am the HR manager here at SGWASA. So this summer, we will have an intern through the Golden Leaf Foundation. So the intern is actually paid through them. So we have partnered with them to become one of the places that students can choose from. This particular individual, he is interested in engineering. He's not quite sure what he wants to do. But we wanted to kind of show him the utility side of engineering. So he will start, I think it's June the 9th. And that will run through the second week in August, if I'm not mistaken. He is from Warren County. We have put together a schedule for him to work on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. They have to work a minimum of 240 hours, no more than 400. So we've put a schedule together for him to kind of shadow at the water plant, the wastewater plant, and then he'll spend time with Joel going out in projects and then helping us with scanning the maps and doing stuff like that.
Excellent. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's funded.
We're excited to have our first intern work for us and hoping that we'll have more in the future to help us out in different disciplines.
Funny, I just saw it. I just thought about it.
And Crystal and I have talked about getting an intern for communications as well. So we continue to work on that.
Great. Yeah. How did the person find out about us?
How did our intern find out about us? Well, actually, we had our HR manager, Priscilla, reach out and coordinate through different agencies. And we worked through the agency, and then they work to place interns with us that meet certain criteria. So we're always looking for those opportunities.
Maybe we should put it on our website under our jobs.
Well, this internship is through the
Yes, through Golden Leaf, so it's different.
So this internship it's for college students.
Yeah.
So it's not something that anyone can just go and apply for.
No, and I know that
They
there's a
reach
lot
out
of,
to the universities.
yeah, I know that there's a lot of universities that offer internships to their students. And if we don't know
This is-
that we do it, it's
Yeah. Well, this one, the Golden Leaf Foundation actually goes out and recruits these interns. So it's not based on like a certain university or anything like that. And it does pertain to certain things like engineering, agricultural type things, construction, that kind of stuff. I don't think it really has, from what I understood, anything sort of like administrative. Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll continue to pursue and reach out further as we kind of get our feet wet with an intern in the organization at this point. So
That's it's a good starting point.
Yep.
That's what we're doing.
we thought it's
That's great.
So again, thank you, Priscilla. Really appreciate that. Hey, committee members, any follow-up questions on the topics we just discussed in terms of work chart or proposed scale for classification?
I don't believe so.
Again, I think our normal timing is to bring this to the board following the budget approval. So the June document that you'll see at your June board meeting. Assuming that we get a budget passed in May. Next item 6, proposed budget, other topics. We actually have a copy of the draft meeting minutes from the 2/28/24 Finance Committee meeting. I'm not sure if the committee members had an opportunity to review this. I hope that you did. And if you did have an opportunity, are there any changes that need to be made to these minutes?
See anything?
I didn't see anything either. Are we still on target for the payroll transition update in September?
We'll know better about that once we get under our contract with Tyler Technology, which we're very close to doing. And I will be happy to update the board once we have that contract and that schedule to let you know where we are on that. And then also in terms of what we call the prepaid to post payroll
Right.
changeover. Be happy to update the board on that. And I think just to touch on that topic again, Richard, I think we discussed at the last meeting in terms of that program charge. We were promoting that idea come out of fund balance. Correct.
That's correct. It's not included in the budget. Just as a reminder of what we discussed in the first committee meeting. It's
Yeah.
not in the proposed budget. We're discussing when that is implemented. We will approach you with the budget amendment. Recommending it come out of fund balance.
I love budget amendment, but it's still at approximately $150,000, right?
That's current projection.
Okay.
And again, the reason we didn't put it in budget is it's a one-time thing and we didn't want to overinflate rates for that are recurring for a one-time event.
Any consideration, did you want to move to?
Oh.
Before we go to our here?
All right, is there? Yeah, we have a motion that we approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed with the same right? Right, motion carried.
Thank you. Moving on to our final 3 items here, most recommendations from the members.
Are there any comments or recommendations?
Just thank you all for anticipating questions that have come up today and having all the information available. Richard, we need to stop this mind reading thing that we got going on.
I'm learning now.
You are.
Beating to the punch.
Other comments from our chair? I too would like to thank everyone that provided information to make this process very smoothly. And Scott, thank you for your comments and making sure that we have the items and details that we need to make informed decisions. So we do appreciate everyone's support in making this possible. So with that, I guess we go to next steps.
Thank you. Appreciate that as well. So you can see on your screen on our agenda, we've got next steps ahead of us, A, B, and C. We have a required public hearing. Our first opportunity will be at the April 9th, 2024 board meeting. Before that, we will push out the budgets to all of the board members and also to the public. And I believe that is scheduled for close of business on the 28th of March. Is that correct, Richard? Next Thursday, I think, is our target, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it will be posted on our website. All board members will receive a copy that is public that at that point for review. We will have our public hearing on 4/9/24. That gives the board the opportunity to listen to the comments from the public and see if there are any changes promoted for that. And then we have our first opportunity for approval of the proposed FY 24-25 budget. Is first opportunity is 5/14/24. That's the May board meeting. And your second opportunity is 6/11/24. And once again, those are just our current regularly scheduled monthly board meetings, our regular board meetings. And then just a note that our budget must be passed by midnight on 6/30/24. So if the budget does not pass at a regular meeting, then subsequent emergency meetings, additional meetings will need to be held until we get the budget passed. That is our goal. All right, very good. Any questions by the committee members on that schedule?
The only thing is we can't get it passed. If we need to have that meeting before June 27th, because after that I'll be gone. Through the end of July, through the first week of July. So if we have to get it passed by 6/30/24 and a second opportunity on 6/11 comes up,
I would,
we gotta move quick.
to meet your schedule, then I would highly suggest that we pass it on 5/14.
That idea.
All right, and with that, I would just like to thank the Finance Committee on behalf of the SGWASA staff here. We've got a great team here that put this budget together, responded to your comments and your questions to prepare us for today. We have a couple of tasks that we need to do, obviously between now and next Thursday before we publish the final draft budget, but we look forward to doing that on time. And then we look forward to our April board meeting coming up for our required public hearings.
So it'll be next Thursday. So I need to know when the phone is going to start ringing.
Okay, very good. So again, on behalf of the SGWASA team, thank you very much. We have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, can I have a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. Motion carried. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's empty.